I see my face on the cover of a magazine, but at the end of the day, I wanna make you smile. Jesus, at the end of the day, oh, I wanna make you smile. Maybe I won't own a house on the hill, or drive one of those new Mercedes, yeah. Maybe they won't call me, 'cause I choose God's will and not their money. At the end of the day, I wanna make you smile. Jesus, at the end of the day, oh, I wanna make you smile. If I have everything and don't have you, my life will be worth nothing. No fancy cars or diamond ring can fill this place in love. At the end of the day, Jesus, I wanna make you smile. At the end of the day, I wanna make you smile. Lord, walk with me and talk with me. Tell me I am your own. There's no other place I'd rather be than in your will, oh God Almighty. At the end of the day, I wanna make you smile. Jesus, at the end of the day, oh, I wanna make you smile. At the end of the day.
Every Wednesday at 11 a.m. on Love 101, you're invited to listen to Good Morning Minister, a weekly feature where government ministers will speak about the developments in their various ministries. Listen for the updates and have your questions and concerns ready to share inside Good Morning Minister as the Minister of Information, Robert Morgan, and a guest minister or agency head discuss the issues and take your questions and suggestions. Get ready to call in during Good Morning Minister, 11 a.m. on Wednesdays, right here on Love 101. The
Minister is brought to you by the Office of the Prime Minister.
My song. Tell me a little bit about that song.
I want to make you smile. Go home. You want to say, yes, yes, God, yes, Jehovah, I made you happy.
Well, this morning we have a very special guest.
Very special.
We have the children's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
How do I pronounce her name? Mrs. Diahann Gordon Harrison. Perfect. Good morning.
Morning, Minister. Good to be with you. Morning, Najee.
Morning.
Thank you very much. And the reason we have the children's advocate here, can I call you Diahann?
Certainly.
Right.
Yes.
we've been having a series on this program where we bring in persons in the children's sector. This is very important, and you know that the government has recently tabled amendments in the parliament. By the way, good morning to everybody on TikTok, good morning to everybody on Instagram, on Facebook, and also those listening on Love 101, the family station. Remember, you can call us at 968-8327, 968-8328, or you can send us a WhatsApp on 997-3125. Now, the reason why we have this lovely lady with us today is that a lot has been happening as it relates to children. The government has opened a therapeutic center for outpatient services at Maxwell Park Children's Home. We have another one in St. Anne, which is for inpatient services. And we've been doing a lot of work. We're trying to repeal Section 24 of the Child Care and Protection Act, which gave the justice system the ability to put children in peace. A lot of us don't really recognize, because children, you don't really see children all the time. They don't vote, they don't work in many cases, they shouldn't work in many cases. So they are sometimes an unheard voice. But we want to give voice to our children, and one of the persons who's responsible to help to protect our children and to ensure that our children are being treated well by the state and by the society is the children's advocate. How long have you been children's advocate?
Since 2012, so just over 11 years. Yes, the time has flown.
You must have seen a lot.
I have, and not only in that portfolio, but of course, before being children's advocate, I came to the office from being an acting senior deputy director of public prosecution. So I have seen a lot.
You used to work at the DPP's office?
Yes, I was.
So tell me, what is the job of the children's advocate?
Well, there are many different descriptions. The children's advocate can be seen as an ombudsperson for children, whereby we speak about issues in a national space that impact children. The children's advocate is also a legal representative of children. So we appear in courts for children, both those who are charged and those who are victims. We also institute proceedings on behalf of children where their rights have been violated.
So you are the children's lawyer?
Yes, that's a good description. And of course, very importantly as well, is the role that the children's advocate plays as a commission of parliament, because we advise ministers of government, the parliament as a whole, in the review of legislation and policies and so on. And we also issue guidance and best practice on the rights of children and ways in which stakeholders can observe those rights.
So let's bring it down to brass tacks. So if it is that I'm a child and I feel like somebody has hurt me, do I call you?
Yes, you can. You can call us if you want an investigation to be done, or you want an inquiry to be done, whereby we say, all right, this may not get to the level of, criminal sanctions, but there is need for a discussion. So all the parties can. Parents also have us in relation to matters impacting their children. So we have done a number of cases, for example, coming from the school sector, where parents believe that the issues that affected their children need a relook, and they have reached out to us. So we have convened roundtable discussions with school boards and administrations to have matters examined. We have taken the tough route sometimes, where it's not just a discussion, but there's a little bit more. And we do a number of different matters. So anyone, in fact, including children, can reach out to us. All
right, so let us start at the beginning. So the Office of the Children's Advocate was set up when?
In 2006. We started in February of 2006.
And did that came out of the Child Care and Protection Act?
Yes, it did. It did.
So that is the law that governs how we treat children in Jamaica.
Yes, it's the law.
Tell us a little bit about that.
All right. So essentially, the Child Care and Protection Act is a direct derivative of Jamaica's state party status under the Convention on the Rights of the Child.
I'm sorry, I have to stop you.
Yes.
We try to go down a little bit lower, in the language.
Okay, all right. So let me start very basic.
Yes.
So there's a big document issued by the United Nations which sets out how children ought to be treated as countries in the world. Now, Jamaica, being a country that likes to be a leader in the world, said as far back as 1991 that we're going to sign on to this big document known as the Convention on the Rights of the Child. once we signed on, it means that there are certain duties that we have as a country.
Right.
And so one of the first responses of our country in 2004 was to pass the Child Care and Protection Act. Now, that piece of law basically says that every single person who deals with a child in whatever capacity must take that child as an individual. Look at the child, see what's going on in the child's life, see what circumstances are impacting the child, and make decisions in keeping with the best interest of that child. So basically, that's the purpose of the Child Care and Protection Act. It says that we need to see children as people.
That sounds like children have rights.
They do.
No opinion on the rights, man.
Yeah.
I will feed them, I will shelter them, I will send them to school. What kind of rights are you talking about?
So those incidentally are part of the rights, but that's just a quarter. Those are the protection
a lot of Jamaicans
rights.
Don't believe that children have rights.
Yes, and Jamaica is not alone. A lot of the Caribbean countries don't believe that. In fact, a lot of countries over the world.
But why is it important for children to have rights, though?
Because as time has evolved, we have recognized that children are actually people, that they actually have thoughts, and they have a heart, and they have views, and they have things that impact them. And a funny story that I'll share with you and your listeners, Minister, is that this whole issue of children's rights kind of came about as a follow-up to women's rights. So back in the day, it was perfectly all right for a man to discipline his wife by beating her. That was accepted. And then suddenly women started to wake up and say, but oh my goodness, we're people. And if we're people, a grown man who is our partner shouldn't be beating us. And so women's rights became a big thing. After women's rights made some headway, children's rights started as well, because there was a recognition that children were people with feelings. And if you cut them, they will bleed. If you don't feed them, they will starve. If they have medical health issues and you don't treat them, then they will be impacted. And so that really is the genesis of how children's rights became a movement, so to speak. And the convention, as I said, look, we have to not only believe this, but we have to act like they have rights, and they need to be enabled because
so
they're vulnerable.
What are some of the rights that children have?
All right, so they have the basic right to food, to shelter, to clothing, but they also have the right to protection, meaning as children are young, children are vulnerable and very trusting, the adults in their lives need to ensure that there are systems around them that don't expose them to harm. So what does that mean? It means that children shouldn't be in situations like a gang where they could possibly be exposed to violence. It means that they shouldn't be left alone at home without proper supervision, because they get up to mischief and things can happen. The fires can start, somebody may break in, and that child is alone and defenseless and not sure of how to negotiate that situation. Children have a right to education as well. We know that education is the ticket to a bright future. So if we're not kind of pouring in learning into children so they can achieve their full potential, it means we're violating that right. They have a right to healthcare. They have a right to religious expression. They have a right to participate in decisions that will impact their lives. And there are a plethora of rights that really exist from that common sense position that if these things don't obtain, children won't be able to live their best lives and won't be able to grow into the type of adult that will be a productive and contributing adult.
Somebody says the law gives children too much rights.
I think that is perhaps coming from a situation that is not fully understanding the complexion of what the law says. The law isn't giving a runaway train set of rights to children. Unfortunately, have a lot of people in children's lives who violate them, who see them as, oh, I feel like having sex today. You are 12, so you come to me. There are people in our society who regrettably think like that. And so the law is not over-prescribing rights. It's just saying that people need to respect the autonomy of the privacy of a child's body. People need to respect the importance of giving a child education. You can't just say, well,
so they have a right to education?
They absolutely have a right to education. Without education, it means that we'll be taking the raw material of a baby and having that baby grow up in the wild without any kind of formal instruction. And if that child isn't getting the education, what will become of him or her when they attain adulthood?
So tell me, why is it, so you raised the point about child abuse in terms of sexual violence. Is that a big deal in Jamaica? Is that a big issue?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the two leading categories of child abuse are child neglect and a child in need of care and protection. And the third one right after that is sexual abuse.
So let us start at the beginning. Let's start with number one. What is child neglect?
Child neglect is when you have a child that you're responsible for and you don't fulfill your responsibility. So the child is not going to school. The child is on the street 5 days per week. The child gets an injury, needs medical attention, and you're just too busy to do anything about it. So, the cut becomes a sore, the sore becomes infected. Or you have a situation where the child is going without food for a number of days. That's child neglect.
Right. So tell me now, so you have child neglect and you have the other one, which is?
A child in need of care and protection, which is very close to child neglect. That simply means that you have parents in the space or guardians in the space, but they're not fulfilling all of the responsibilities that they should towards the child. So they're probably feeding the child, but they're not sending the child to school. Or they're probably loving up the child one day and then the next day beating the child with a baton, right? So it's where you have the need for support to that parental style to adequately care for the child who they have a responsibility towards or protect the child in a very proactive and continuous way.
And the third one you said was?
Sexual abuse.
Is that a big issue in Jamaica though?
It is. It is. We're seeing all forms of sexual abuse. We're seeing sex with a person under 16 years. We're seeing incest. We're seeing rape.
We do have incest in Jamaica.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I personally have prosecuted
Jamaicans
a number of incest cases.
Jamaicans do those things, children's advocate.
We very much have it, Minister.
But a lot of people are shocked, because we have a lot of decent people in Jamaica who protect their children. And when they sit here and they listen to you saying that we have these issues, it's shocking to them.
It is shocking. And that underscores the need for children having rights to be a recurring theme, because we do have a lot of right-thinking Jamaicans who can't even believe that this is our reality. But we have to remember that we have deviance in our society.
Is it a cultural issue or is it just a criminal issue? Or do people just get up one day and say, I'm going to do something to a child? Or do you think it's some cultural underpinnings that
I think it's a mix. When we look at some parishes, and I don't want to single out any, but when we look at some parishes, it's very normal for family members to say, I was a good father, I was a good grandfather, I paid for my daughter to go to school, or I supported my granddaughter, and so I should really get first dibs. And so when it's time in their minds for the sexual initiation of that child, they want to go ahead to be the first one to sample that child. And so that's a way of thinking. Another way of thinking is that we want to keep love within the family, Another way of thinking, when we're not talking about incest, is that it's just a little sex. Girls, as in girls who are minors, are easier partners than women who are sophisticated and have a lot of demands, But men have physical urges. And so a child is seen as a suitable partner. And I put suitable in quotes, because the child is just there to fulfill a need. Won't have much demands, A box of KFC will do, or money to do your hair because a fair is coming up. And so that's kind of low moral bite, I call it, that some men have them seeing that as a good vehicle to satisfy their sexual urges. Is it men alone, though? No, it's not men alone. But when we look at the statistics, of course, girls are predominantly shown as victims and men as perpetrators. But I think, again, that's a part of our cultural reality, whereby boys who are perhaps violated by women are underreporting for a number of reasons. How can a man say he was sexually violated? You're not a real man if you're complaining about that. And also the issue of disbelief that women can be perpetrators. But we have seen anecdotally, not formal cases, where you have some grown women who go to football matches just because they want to support schoolboy football because of the eye candy, as far as they see it. Yes.
You said what?
Yes. So that is something that...
No, hold on. That one kind of took me off my chair. That there are women who go to football matches to prey on young boys.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't think people knew that.
Wow.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
And so we do have women who are not doing the right thing either by our children.
That's a bit shocking.
Mm-hmm.
So we've spoken about some of the problems. And the studio went quiet a while ago because I don't think we're usually very lively, and
I'm sorry to
it
dampen the
went
spirit.
quiet a while ago because I don't think a lot of people understood the full extent of some of the challenges that we have. So we've identified the main challenges. So let's talk about some of the solutions. What have we been doing as a country? What has your office been doing? Not just to defend children in the courts, but to help parents to understand better how to take care of children. Like, for example, the area of child neglect.
Yes. All right. So for us, public education is a massive tool. And so at the office, we have a public education and special projects department, which really takes on various ways of building capacity and awareness among not just parents, but other adults who are in children's lives. So, for example, we have an OCA school tour where we target schools based on the issues we see coming out of the community. And the kind of messages that we deliver are informed by the information. We're in the schools. We're also in the streets. That didn't sound so right. But we do community interventions where we go to town centers, the clock, the library, the market centers, where we engage parents and other members of the community around issues that they need to be paying attention to. Importantly as well, we're almost at every PTA meeting. We are at community town halls. We are at churches. We do a lot of church interventions because our churches can't be left out as a part of the solution. And then, of course, there's the issue of having parent-child weekends. In fact, we did one in May during Child Month where we had children who we thought could do with some intervention. We normally support them. And this time we said we're going to do a residential camp for parents and children to impact the way that parents are parenting and to deal with some specific issues. So we had parent coaches coming in. We had psychologists coming in. We had persons coming in to engage them in parent-child activity. And what's very heartwarming is that since the intervention has ended, many parents have written to say, I never quite thought about it like that. And that residential intervention where you had us for 4 days is something that, is serving us well now that we're back home. So those are just some of the examples of what we've been doing.
So before we go on to number 2 and 3, someone asked on our WhatsApp, "Good morning, Minister. What about a child who wants to have their own way and you will not have it?" And the child said, "I am going to kill myself."
Right. So that's a heavy one because it means that once the child says that, you have to start wondering whether there are suicidal thoughts or ideations. And very urgently, there's the need for counseling intervention.
So how do they get that counseling?
All right. So there is the 24-hour child and teen helpline that we have, which is staffed by psychologists and counselors. It's 1-888-SAFE-SPOT. There is also a WhatsApp line that they can send a text if they don't want to,
and what's
speak.
the WhatsApp line?
And that is 876-439-5199.
Can you repeat that for me?
Let me check it first before I repeat it.
Right. Well, let us ask the other question. Good morning, Minister. That's why education and awareness should begin from a tender age. It should be part of the school curriculum and also part of the government broadcast on TV, radio, and social media. We need more education and awareness than we see.
Yeah, there's never anything as too much education. I really do agree with that listener because you can't have too much capacity to respond to a problem. So that has to be continuous.
Somebody's asking, what about children in state care and juvenile detention centers? And somebody previously asked, that there was a child in state care who got pregnant. How does that work? Shouldn't a child in state care not be in that position?
A child in state care is supposed to be receiving the best care, as far as I'm concerned.
But do you have incidents where that happens?
We have unfortunate incidents coming out of state care institutions.
Is that as bad as it used to be, or it has improved?
That's a good question. I can't say definitively because I'd have to have some data to see what has happened, in terms of trends. But what we do know is that there are instances that really should not be happening.
So what do you do as children's advocate when you find out that something like that has happened?
All right. So the rubric of state care falls within the mandate of the Child Protection and Family Services Agency. And outside of that, if it is that something has gone wrong, as in this particular case, then the Office of the Children's Advocate has the authority to inquire into what happened, what went wrong, how did this happen, how did the perpetrator have access to the child, and really to see if there are any breaches that obtain at the institution that would have led to this situation occurring.
So I know that you do audits of children's homes, I think. Is that correct?
We do inspections, both announced and unannounced. And one of our strategies is that we can also do an audit of children's homes.
So you would just turn up at a child care facility without anybody knowing to see what is happening there?
Yes, we have done that in the past. We do both announced and unannounced.
So with all the resources that we're spending, we have your office, we have the CPFSA, we have various other government initiatives like child diversion and so on. Are we doing better taking care of our children?
I think that we've made progress over time. I mean, if you look,
better parents?
Some people are. Some people are, and that's across the board. I'm not just talking, uptown or middle class, but you have parents who are knocking it out of the ballpark with $0. So we're seeing where there is an awakening and there's a consciousness that my child isn't just somebody that I get. My child requires my time. I don't have a car, but I hear the crime situation is bad. I'm going to put my youth on the handlebars of my bicycle and I'm going to ride with my do-rag and no shirt to the school gate to drop off my youth. We've seen that. So I think that the awareness is growing, which is positive. But I think that there's so much work that needs to be done.
So in the relation to the second, so we're trying to talk about solutions. Child in need of care and protection. Where are we with that?
All right. So those children effectively are children who have parents or who have guardians, but there is something that's not working quite right in the structure. And there are a number of initiatives that I can think of that have happened over time. For instance, where such a child is placed before the court, for the court to inquire into the circumstances and, what do we need to do with this particular child. I've seen at the Kingston and St. Andrew Family Court downtown, where they now have parenting classes.
Really?
As a part of the structure of the court. So
the child goes to court.
Right.
The judge looks at the situation and can assign them to parenting class.
And says, come, daddy, come. You need to go and do some classes here. In fact, I've had the privilege of being guest speaker on different occasions at the graduation of the parents who have gone through the course. They absolutely
and they get a
graduate.
certificate to say we have gone through parenting.
Absolutely.
So
and it's compulsory.
Progress.
It's compulsory because if they don't show that investment of their time and the effort, and then some of the sessions include dual sessions that include the children, and the court isn't satisfied at the end of the process that they've actually turned the corner, then there are other consequences that could flow in terms of, we're going to take the child away. We're going to ask you to make a contribution when we take the child away financially to a facility and so on. And so parents who participate are actually very invested and come back and give their testimonials and so on. So there are programs that are seeking to target, of course, Minister, based on where you were before, there's a National Parenting Support Commission as well. And, there is this emphasis on educating parents before things go wrong. And the schools also play a very useful part.
So is the help that they can get just in Kingston or it's across the island?
No. So the Office of the Children's Advocate, for example, is only in Kingston, but we go across the island. There is no nook or cranny that's too deep. And so we travel across the island to wherever the problem is. As you know as well, we have children's courts that service the island as well. So there is that access through the courts. And of course,
and you guys are in those courts as well?
Absolutely, we are.
So how does it work? So a child is before the court. Does somebody call you and tell you that a child is before the court, or they have to tell you the minute that they're bringing a child before the court?
No, so often it's not that we're told the minute before before the process starts, that a child is being taken to court. But again, under the CCPA, Section 4 mandates a judge that if a child is appearing before them in court and that child is without legal protection, and there is the need for that protection, that the judge is actually supposed to adjourn the case, stall it, and call the children's advocate for that protection to be given. There's also the alternative that if the judge doesn't want to go that route, they can also provide legal aid if it is that there's a child who is before the court in terms of a criminal offense, right? So the courts usually reach out to us, and that applies at all levels, parish court and also the Supreme Court.
I remember when I was growing up, there used to be a song I won't call the name, where the man was proclaiming his love for his sweet 16. Do Jamaicans accept that sexual interaction with underage children is wrong?
Some people do, some people don't. But no, you're taking us into dangerous waters, Minister, because remember, the age of consent is 16. And so he can proclaim his love for a 16-year-old because that 16-year-old, if she's up to it, is in fact capable in law to consent to sex.
But we see so many instances, and I don't know if we've seen them as much, but we have seen many instances where it is almost an acceptable thing for children under 16 to be engaged in certain ways. What intervention as a society can we do or have been doing? Because the studies have shown that the longer you take to get pregnant is the better your chances of being successful in education, being successful in your life, and your children will have a better chance at being successful as well. What role does your office have in changing the culture that exists in many places?
Right.
That if you don't have a pitney by a certain age, you are or whatever.
Right. So again,
especially with the boys who are told if you don't have a kid by a certain age, you're not a real man.
Oh dear. So first of all, it's to reverse that narrative. Again, intervention in terms of capacity building, awareness, and having real conversations with our children, teenagers, that this is not how the world is structured. If it is that you want to go along a particular path as a girl, this is what you need to be doing.
Right.
So we really get face to face with those kids, especially on the school tours, where we're engaging them. And as I said, it's not an airy-fairy presentation we're doing. We're talking to them about the real issues. Sometimes when we're finished with the presentation and the interaction with the entire student body, you will have students lined up afterwards because we have struck a chord and they need to get specific information about how to deal with a particular situation. Through Safe Spot as well, we have children, a lot of them who call about challenges that they're having with romantic relationships. And so the guidance and coping is given to them through that particular avenue as well.
So somebody asked on TikTok a while ago that you said that the age of consent is 16, and they want to know, what does that mean?
It means that if somebody is having sexual relationships with a child who is 16 and she is okay with it, there's nothing that the law or any investigation can do. So that child
what if it happens
has no
on
legal
the
protection.
day before your birthday?
The day before your 16th birthday,
Yeah.
then it means that something can be done. But once you hit 16 years old, once midnight strikes from 15 to 16 and you cross that threshold, there's nothing that the law can do. So what that means is you could have a 16-year-old who's living at home with mommy and daddy, and it's clear as day that she's having sexual intercourse. Mommy and daddy don't agree with it. Everybody sees that she's headed for trouble, but the law doesn't permit any particular legal reaction. So nobody can be arrested for that if she's up to it. That's what that's saying.
So we've seen incidents where you're at the clinic and you see a 16-year-old come 8 months pregnant. What do you do then? What does the doctor have a responsibility there, or we just make it go on and it happen already?
No, well, there is a responsibility if you trace it back, for example, and you can say that conception happened before she was 16.
Does that really happen in Jamaica though?
We have some persons who make the complaint.
But isn't there something in the CCPA that says that once you suspect a child has been sexually abused, you have an obligation to report it?
All types of abuse, yes.
Right.
Yes, there is an obligatory duty that is placed on persons who suspect or know.
And who are those persons? I think they're called
prescribed persons.
Who are those
right
persons?
So we have two layers, so
Right.
it's everybody has that responsibility.
So
the
if you-
fishmonger, the
if-
bus conductor, the taxi operator has that responsibility.
So if you're a Jamaican,
Yes.
first layer, and you suspect a child has been abused,
Mhm.
you have a responsibility to report it.
Absolutely.
But you also have another category like
Right. Prescribed persons
Right.
know, who are people that the law elevates because of what they do for a living. So generally, a prescribed person is anyone who, by virtue of their occupation,
Mhm.
has high exposure to children. So we're talking about school teachers, coaches, persons who work in clinics, hospitals, medical practitioners, social workers, guidance counselors. Those kinds of persons are deemed to be prescribed persons.
So there are two other things I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about Section 24, and I also want to talk to you about a special role that you have, which is the Rapporteur on human trafficking.
Mhm.
What is human trafficking? It sounds like a big concept.
It does sound like it's a big concept, but it's so simple, and it's been happening here for a long time, but we just never knew it was human
Right.
trafficking. So essentially, human trafficking is when one individual exploits another person,
Meaning,
and the benefit goes back to that
meaning use
person.
them.
Right. Right. So any kind, so it doesn't mean trafficking as in moving from one place to the other. You can be trafficked in your own house,
Mhm.
right? It doesn't mean travel. It just means that somebody sees Minister Morgan, he looks like he could make some money, just put on a nice tight shirt and get all kinds of girls rushing
Mhm.
at him. And the money that you make from that doesn't go to you. It goes to the person who sees you and gives you the tight shirt.
So basically, a young girl who is caught at a exotic nightclub somewhere in Portmore
Mhm.
is trafficked.
Not necessarily. You would have to then go on to prove that there is an act of exploitation. So it has to be that she's perhaps giving men lap dances,
Mhm.
and the money that's collected is going to somebody else other than her, or that she's involved in sexual activity
So trafficking.
and the money that
But,
you
I mean,
make.
come on. I mean, I don't think we have that problem in Jamaica. We don't have a lot of people who are
Mhm.
being forced to do these things.
We do. In fact, the most common types we have are sex trafficking, which of course again features women
So
mostly as
underage-
victims.
So do you deal with underage or you deal with everybody?
Everybody.
But
everybody.
so let us start with underage. We know that there was a story recently where they found a young girl at a particular place.
Mhm,
And we also had another one where they found 3 of them.
mhm.
Would that be trafficking?
Once the investigation shows that there was exploitation in that place, it would be trafficking.
So does the person have
So-
to benefit from the exploitation?
Yes, yes.
So
There
what if
has to
there's
be that
no-
benefit. And
what-
it doesn't have to be cash,
Okay.
It could be in kind.
Okay.
So you, for example, could say to your friends, come on over. I have a nice girl here that could satisfy some urges. They come, they have sexual intercourse, satisfy themselves at the expense of this girl, and they don't pay you or pay her, but then you get props.
So what
and
happens
you
if you
get
catch that
accepted.
person?
That person is prosecuted for human
Is
trafficking.
there a penalty? What's the penalty for that?
There's so many different ones. So we have a Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Punishment and Suppression Act, which has a number of different penalties. Maximum, if it's a child, though, is that they could get sentenced to 30 years.
30 years?
Yes, 30 years.
So if you're
Right.
caught trafficking a child, and it doesn't mean carry her from Kingston to Mobay, but you exploit her and benefit from it,
Mhm.
or him,
Yes,
you could end up in prison for 30 years.
yes.
Has,
yes.
Have we ever caught anybody like that?
Yes, we have. There's a case, in fact, that for some reason it keeps popping up at the top of my mind since last week, which means I probably need to check on what's happening with the fellow.
Yes.
But this one had to do with labor trafficking in relation to boys.
Right.
And we see this all the time, but this was a famous case where a man gave some boys some nice little cans to go and beg money at the stoplight
Right.
on the basis that he was a football coach and he was going to be having a camp.
Right.
But the camp was a little short of money to buy the gear. So
Right.
their responsibility now was to go and beg the money and so on. Of course, there was no camp. And all the money that those boys for hours
Mhm.
were forced to beg at the stoplights in the sun throughout the night was money that he would take
so
and
he
use for his own.
forced them.
Right. So it's that one is called forced begging, and it's a component of.
So what if the begging is not forced?
Well, if the begging is not forced, it may not be prosecuted as human trafficking, but there now you come to the whole issue of a child being in need of care and protection.
So these children are at the stoplight in school hours asking for money. What would you call that?
Well, they're on the face of it in need of care and protection, on the face of it. If there is a mastermind, however, that's forcing them to be there, then it could be a trafficking situation, because that's where the exploitation would come in. But if they're just kids, for example, whose parents send them to school and they say, I'm not going to school, I prefer the stoplight, then that could be on the face of it, children who are in need of care and protection. And an inquiry would need to be done now in terms of what's happening in that home. Why is this child not going to school? That because of the education to neglect, the exposure being on the road and so on can bring harm to them and so forth.
So can children be at the stoplight in school hours?
There shouldn't be. There shouldn't be. Children should be in school.
Against that?
Well, children should be in school.
Right.
Again, under the CCPA, Child Care and Protection Act, it says that
children's
children...
advocate, I see the little youth and him hungry, and him there from morning, and I just want to give him like a $500. Should I do that?
I don't encourage it. And a part of me, sometimes you see it, and I engage them in conversation. So you may give them something to eat and so on, but it should be that you're getting information. So when you leave them, you can call.
So people who see these kids at the stoplight, because I see some young ones, some like 8, 9, 10. So we should call the authorities.
Yes, absolutely.
And what will happen to them when we call?
Well, again, it kickstarts the need for the agents of the state to inquire into why are you here?
Right.
Where is your mother? Where is your father? Where you live? And sometimes when you get into that backstory, it leads you to clues that if you follow them can lead to some positive intervention, or it may lead to a very dark place, which says that these kids are really in some very troublesome home situations and we need to do some extraction. I mean, we've done some going down the rabbit hole before, and in one occasion we found that the mother was somebody who wanted a start in life, wanted to do a little stall, to sell phone card and snacks and so on. And because she wasn't successful in that, she thought that it was okay for her kids to miss some days of school to help out. So you can write that situation with the support.
Is it always a case where you arrest the parents, or do you have ways of like intervening to assist them to be better parents and try to help them financially?
It's hardly a case where the parents are arrested. That's not the first response. The first response is, how can we make this situation right to ensure that these children are in a structured system of care and to keep the family together? Because that really is the first option. What can be fixed so this family unit stays together but functions better? Right? So arresting the parent is really the very last resort.
So as rapporteur, and I hope I'm pronouncing it properly.
Perfect.
What are some of the things that Jamaica has been doing over time to improve the awareness of human trafficking and to intervene where we find cases of human trafficking?
All right. So our legislation was passed from 2005.
That was about the same, a little bit before your office.
Yes. But we have gone through so many different amendments to that legislation to make it cutting edge and relevant. For example, human trafficking is the first to the line in terms of criminal matters, where the accused can be prosecuted for human trafficking. And if he or she is convicted, can be ordered right there by the court, the criminal court, not civil court where you sue, criminal court, to pay restitution to the victim. So
if you are convicted for human trafficking, you may be asked to pay back the money that you use the victim to earn.
Or not even just to pay it back.
What if it was an illegal activity?
You mean if
you cause the person to do an illegal activity that you benefited from financially?
Right, whatever it is. If you're convicted,
the
court under the amendment to the trafficking law has that power to say, I am going to order that you pay $5 million to this victim. And it's not necessarily dollar for dollar. So it's not that you're saying, oh, you exploited the victim and she made $1 million for you. But the assessment is much wider. They're looking at, yes, you made money from her, but then also there are the financial woes that she's going to have because she missed school. So she's not going to get a good job right now. So she needs to be able to pay for skills training or for education. Also, she may have medical issues because of the type of trafficking she was involved in. So to meet those medical expenses and future medical complications that she could have, money for that as well. And then there's a psychological component where you've broken someone, you know, and so you can't fix that with money, but all of those things go into determining what is an appropriate sum for restitution.
Somebody says, how can a 16-year-old have a relationship with a grown man, but can't, I don't think she can talk about the voting part, TikTok, but can't vote or have a proper job.
I get exactly where that person is coming from.
Are 16-year-olds allowed to work though?
They can in certain safe environments, we call it. If, for example, it's not an environment that has a whole heap of hazardous, machinery or toxic chemicals and so on. Yes, as long as it's not too burdensome, so you're tired or it's or too strenuous.
What if your father owned a bus? Because I used to conduct on my father's bus when I was a kid. Was I allowed to conduct on the bus?
It depends how old you were, and it depends what kind of bus.
I was in sixth form, and I used to conduct on my father's bus. Rock, Ashley, and Darla. That's in Moko. That's where the bus used to run. You see me, one already. But fun and jokes aside, though. So before no, I don't have any pictures. So before we end, as I said, there are two areas that I wanted to touch. We have touched Rapporteur, but somebody asked a question on TikTok that we need to answer. The controversial issue about the age of consent. No, I know you are independent of government, so you can say anything you want and I won't lose my job. Should the age of consent be 16? Is a 16-year-old ready to engage in a relationship with an adult?
Or with anybody. I have submitted strenuously before the Joint Select Committee of Parliament, orally and in writing, that I do not believe the age of consent should be 16.
What do you think it should be, 25?
No, I think it should accord with when you attain adulthood.
Which is 18.
18.
But you would send a lot of people to prison, though.
Well, if that's the consequence, so be it.
So, but hold on. Let us go down the rabbit hole on this. So the age of consent wasn't always 16. Where was it before?
It was 14. It was 14.
And in the 80s or 70s, we changed it. Yeah, man, it was 14. Yeah. And now you moved it to 16.
Yes.
So there are a lot of people in Jamaica who are 16. Some of them, both of them are 16, some a little older. If you change that law, aren't you afraid that a lot of these, like let's say a boy who is 16 and a girl who is 16, who goes to prison in that case?
Well, my submission was that the age of consent should be 18. But where you have child and child, so 16 and 17, or a 15-year-old in love with her 16-year-old boyfriend, that kind of a thing, there is a formula in Canada that I quite like and I adopted it, which is called a close-in age exception. And it says that if the teenagers are willingly engaging, there's no force, no beating, no kind of coercion, and they are in a relationship and something happens in that context, we don't want it to happen, right? And there is a response that I recommended, which is that they be put into counseling in terms of sexual behavior and appropriateness and responsibility. But I don't think that's something for the court. So it would, that close-in age exception would prevent those youngsters who are experimenting with sex from being criminally charged or going to prison. My submission was that where you have a 57-year-old now having sex with a 16 or a 17-year-old, that's clear exploitation and a great example of inappropriate sexual contact with a child.
So what difference you think moving it up by 2 will make? Because we're already having the issues where the 57-year-old is having sex with the 16-year-old. I know that you have seen a lot of studies that, and I'm sure your your submission was grounded in science and analytics. So explain to us what you think the impact would be on the society if we moved it to 18, which is the age you can vote, which is the age you can drink alcohol, and the age you can get certain privileges like driving and so forth.
Yes. All right. So I think the two major wins, if you move it from where I sit, is that you give children an opportunity to be children, right? And you also give the brain a little bit more of a chance to develop. We all know that part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex.
Is there anywhere in the world where it's 18?
There's some places where it's 18. And I think my submission, which is so dated in my head now, did cite some of those jurisdictions. But you give the brain a little bit more time to develop maturity. You can make better decisions, right? Which hopefully will impact teenage pregnancy and so on. And then the other big win is that you give parents who have their children under their roof in 4th and 5th and 6th form an opportunity to actively protect their children with the use of the law in their hands. It's a very painful thing when you see a mother coming to you to say, my 16-year-old who used to do so well is now falling off in school, no longer hanging out with friends because she has a boyfriend who is 42. And I see that he's beating her. I see the bruises when she comes home. And all I can say is, I'm so sorry, because there is no legal recourse that mother has, even though the dangers are very clear. And we have her living under her mother's roof.
Do you think Jamaicans want it to increase, though? I know that there are people on TikTok who are saying that 16. My view is that 16 is low. That's my personal view. I think it should be higher than 16. But are Jamaicans willing to accept an age of consent of 18?
Some people are. I think the people who stand on the side of really seriously protecting children in terms of helping them to decide and make decisions that are best for them are on that side. I know that there are some persons, especially if you go into the medical side of it now, that talk about the hormones racing and they're going to have sex anyway. And so this would just now create a greater burden on the kids, and it prevents them from having access to sexual and reproductive health information. I know that there's that component of society that's against it being raised. But I think when you speak to the man in the street, there's very heavy support for it being one thing in terms of when people are adults. That's when they can start thinking about that.
All right. So we've dealt with the rapporteur part. So you report to
Parliament.
Yes. Do you report internationally as well?
We can, because very often for trafficking, especially because the Caribbean doesn't really have very many rapporteurs.
I think you were the first one.
Yes. There is the consultation that is had, certainly from Washington, and also from the Geneva side of things with the UN component.
Okay. All right. So we've dealt with rapporteur. The last thing I want to deal with, and we have 3 minutes. So for many, 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 many years, advocates like yourself and others have been saying we should repeal Section 24, which is, I think you're better to explain what Section 24 is. What is Section 24?
All right. So Section 24 is problem. That's just a simple definition.
Yes, it's problem.
And it's under the Child Care and Protection Act. It's that section that allows parents or guardians who are having trouble managing their children behavior-wise to go to the court to say, Judge, I can't manage.
So hold on. Let us go down to the brass tacks. So if me have a bad pitney, I can go to the police station and say my pitney bad, me can't manage him again. And the police will take that child to the court.
Yes.
And what happens next?
All right. So once that parent comes with that kind of complaint,
right,
the court inquires into what is happening, why you say you can't manage your child, tell me what's happening at home. And the parent would usually explain what's happening and what the challenges are. Under Section 24, there are certain powers that the judge has.
Right.
The judge can say, this don't sound too bad. Go back home and are going to give a supervision order, which means that the authorities will check in and ensure that everything is going okay, or you can come to the parenting classes or session and we see if we can help you. That's one option. Another option is that the court could say, this sounds bad. So we need to find a person who is fit other than the parent to take the child for a while until things
And
settle
that's a
down.
fit person order.
That's a fit person order, which could go to a member of the community or a grandmother,
uncle, granny.
right? Or it could be a fit person now in favor of the state, because there's no auntie, uncle,
children's
granny.
home.
So children's home, place of safety.
Right.
And then the third option, which is the one which is most problematic, is that the court also has the option to give a correctional order, which is a penal order, which sends the child to a juvenile prison, for want of a better expression.
Like Metcalf Street and those. But you cannot send people to prison without charge, though.
Well, because children can be exposed to what we call status offenses, which means it's not a real offense in law, right? But we have these status offenses like the one attached to behavior,
hiding from school, and
hiding from
your mother
school,
and
running away
running
from
away.
home.
But running
These
away
things are
from home
status
is not
offenses.
illegal, is it?
Well, it's not illegal, but because it's a status offense under Section 24, it gives the court that opportunity to make
So
such
this
an
child
order.
who is not charged with a crime,
Mhm.
simply because the parents is of the view that they cannot control the child,
Mhm.
ends up in Metcalf with people who are actually charged with criminal offenses like
Mhm.
rape, murder.
Right. Yeah, the long-term placement
So
would be
but-
Rio Cobra
but
for
that
boys and
doesn't-
South Camp for girls.
That doesn't sound right, though, because you're
Mhm.
locking up a child who is not a violent person
Mhm.
with people who are violent.
Absolutely. And that's the danger of Section 24. I remember when I was looking back at my submission that I made, the fresh one that I made 2 weeks ago and one I made from 2013, I said, how many women have problems with their husband? Or vice versa,
Well,
right?
so-
Husband acting out, you're frustrated, you can't manage him. You
that's
certainly
actually-
can't go to the police to say, take him and send him to prison because I can't manage this behavior. We don't. But yet, because you're a child, by
Yeah.
virtue of being a child,
Yes.
that attaches to you as a status offense. And
So-
that's the unfairness of it.
30 seconds. We're repealing it, finally. So,
Mhm.
so we soon won't be able to send children without charge to prison.
Yes.
Perfect. You have 30 seconds to tell us why it is important to take care of our children.
Because children one day will take care of us as a nation. And if we have people who are broken and can't function because their development is impaired, it means that we have a broken nation. Our goal as Jamaicans must be to preserve for posterity the quality of our country and to build on that from stage to stage.
Excellent. And I really appreciate, I'm not the usual animated self, but it was a very important conversation, and it was a very sobering conversation. I want to thank Love 101, and I want to thank the Children's Advocate, Diahann Gordon Harris, attorney at law, LLB, HONS, and some other letters behind her name that we will repeat. And I also want to thank my friends on TikTok who have been very nice today. I didn't get any abuse from you today,
Oh, that's
except
good.
for one person. I guess it's because Diane is here and she's going to advocate for my safety. And also, our friends on Facebook, until next week, 11 o'clock live here. Good morning, Minister on Love 101, the family station. Nadine, take it away.
Love you, my life will be worth nothing.